Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about the best Berg Violin Concerto. Oh, yes, the Berg Violin Concerto. Now, what a remarkable work this is. It really is astonishing. It's dedicated to the memory of an angel, the angel in question being Manon Gropius, the daughter of architect Walter Gropius and Alma Mahler Gropius, Werfel, etc., who died quite young of meningitis. And Berg interrupted composition on his opera Lulu in order to write this violin concerto. It was therefore the last major work that he completed before his untimely death from an insect bite or that became septic. There's a whole story here. We don't really need to go into it. The thing that makes this concerto so interesting is that, first of all, it is one of the very few concerti that ends quietly that has made it into the repertoire. It is also the only major orchestral concerto by a member of the Second Viennese School, a 12-tone work, theoretically atonal, although, as we shall see, it isn't really terribly. But, this is the piece that everyone trots out in order to show that they really don't hate 12-tone music as much as they're supposed to. And it kind of justifies hating the rest of 12-tone music, because you can always say, well, I like the Berg Violin Concerto. I just hate all the rest of that stuff. Because the Berg Violin Concerto, the violin is a melody instrument. And Berg, being not stupid, writes melodies for it. And they're actually rather hummable melodies. In fact, the opening of its initial 12-note row is simply the open strings of the violin. Which is, what is it, G, D, A, E, something like that, right? So it's just do, 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 do. I could play it. Anybody could play it. Of course, after that, it becomes considerably more difficult. But the piece is really a requiem. It's almost more a tone poem than a concerto, and it's very programmatic. It has the famous Corinthian folk tune in it, which, go to Corinthia and see what it sounds like. I don't care. But it has actual tunes, and it's written in two movements, each movement divided into two parts. The first movement begins with what you might call a portrait of Manon. It's very winsome and coquettish. Then there's a scherzo with a melody marked Wienerisch, sort of a waltz tune, and this wonderful clarinet tune that's sort of like bum da 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 dum. You can hum it. It's one of the few 12-note pieces you can hum. Now the second movement begins with what has to be, the eruption of Manon Gropius's fatal illness, because it's just a crash bang hysteria. And it's very interesting. When Berg writes sort of tragic climaxes, he usually uses this sort of oscillating motive, often on the brass. It's sort of ya da 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 da, like that. It sounds like a European ambulance. It really does. Although I have it from my European friends that ambulances didn't make that sound until later. So perhaps they're quoting the Berg Violin Concerto. Who knows? Anyway, it begins with a really tragic outburst. And this tragic, music that's just full of suffering and pain. And it rises to this huge climax that's quite gripping. And with several whacks on the tam-tam, if you can hear them. In a lot of performances you don't, which pisses me off. And then there's an interlude in which we hear a Bach chorale. The Bach chorale is Es ist genug, it's enough, or Oy vey, I've had it, something like that. And it's played by the clarinets to sound like a quiet organ. It's quite lovely. And then there is a concluding adagio, which is it's just a benediction. It's a requiem. It's begun with the solo violin, which is just swallowed up by the orchestral strings, reaching a passionate climax and dying away, ending with the same music with which the concerto began. It's incredibly moving and just extremely beautiful. And it is the piece that, like most major violinists play when they feel they have to make an obeisance to modern music. At least that's what it was. the fact of the matter is that since 1950 or so, there have been lots and lots of really fine modern violin concertos. And there will be a talk about some of those at some point. I've already mentioned one by Einar Englund. Most of them are tonal, however, because the violin is a melody instrument. And if you're not going to write a tonal concerto, or at least one that pays homage to tonality, you might as well not bother writing a violin concerto. Never mind the fact that no one's going to play it, right? I mean, you have to be out of your mind. So the Berg Concerto remains the iconic violin piece of the Second Viennese School. And rightly so, because it's just a huge masterpiece. It is a tough piece to listen to emotionally. It's not hard because the musical language is so difficult, but it's a very, very deep, profound, sad piece of music. But full of light and shade. It's not entirely miserable. It really isn't. But there you go. That's the work. Now, we have to talk about recordings. And I have a dozen of them here. There will be others. I may mention a couple more along the way. But here's my dozen. Now, the history of the Berg Violin Concerto is not complete without mention of this guy here. This is Louis Krasner, the guy for whom the concerto was written. And he was a modern music specialist and not a terribly great violinist, by the way. And there is this recording that was caught from 1936 with the BBC Symphony Orchestra under Anton Webern, who was quite a fine conductor. He really was. And so this is a historical classic. It is not a very good performance of the Berg Violin Concerto. It is somewhat sluggish in tempo in places, and Krasner, who was not a great violinist, does not sound great here. His tone is thin and wiry, and often you can't hear him at all. It just thins out to nothingness. And the sonics from 1936 are dreadful. And the truth of the matter is that the Berg Violin Concerto needs great orchestral playing. The orchestra is every bit as important as the soloist. Both have to be terrific. Integrating the two is critical. And if you think a 1936 air check that is of uniform dynamic level and clogged texture with a not very great violinist is going to do it, you are out of your mind, even though Krasner was the dedicatee. And I know there are some people who swear by historical recordings that it's a classic document, but that's only because they either A, don't know the work, or B, are imaginatively adding what you can't hear, or C, just think that something so historical has to be great. It's not. So that's the fabulous historical, whatever, legendary performance of Louis Krasner and Anton Webern. And it is a legend because it does not exist in real time as a great performance. Another performance that I don't particularly care for was this one with Renaud Capuçon and Daniel Harding with the Vienna Philharmonic. There's something very cold about this performance and somewhat colorless. I don't know what exactly was going on there, but it doesn't sound like everybody's on the same wavelength in that performance. It's on Erato, Warner Erato, coupled with the Brahms Violin Concerto, another performance I don't especially care for. So, that's me. Doesn't do it for me. Rebecca Hirsch on Naxos is quite average. I think she's a very good violinist. She's done wonderful things in contemporary music. But Eric Klaas with the Netherlands Radio Symphony Orchestra, provides somewhat tepid accompaniments. And Hirsch sounds a bit uncomfortable in the work. The best thing on this disc, it's got some great stuff. It's got the 3 orchestral pieces, also underplayed in my opinion, but a very good 3 pieces for string orchestra from the Lyric Suite. That's the best thing on the disc, but probably not worth getting, and certainly not worth getting for the Violin Concerto. The other one that doesn't thrill me, this is the 4th, all the rest of them I like. So, but I just want to mention these because, they're out there, and the piece tends to encourage a lot of violinists to do it and record labels to record it, but it's you got to pick and choose in this work. You really do. There are some marvelous performances, but there are also some duds, and I would be amiss if I did not mention some of the duds. This is the Berg and Beethoven Violin Concertos, odd coupling, with Isabel Faust and Orchestra Mozart under Claudio Abbado. Now, first of all, this is late and fussy Claudio Abbado. The Orchestra Mozart might be fine for Beethoven, but for the Berg, they're a pickup ensemble. Also, they do not impress me. And Isabel Faust is one of those violinists who something happened to her. I don't know what exactly happened to her. She started out like gangbusters, and she has since become rather strange in terms of her interpretations, especially of classical repertoire, where she sort of follows the modern, less vibrato. I don't know. Her tone is not very pleasing. I don't know what she's doing. I just don't know what she's doing. I find this to be a somewhat mannered and unconvincing interpretation of both concertos. It's on Harmonia Mundi. Skip it. Now let's talk about the good ones, shall we? Now, I just want to point out, there are two others that I'm not mentioning, but I don't have them here, but I have them. I mean, they're out there somewhere. One is Ivry Gitlis, who recently passed away. He does amazing things, as he usually does, with the violin part. I mean, he's a total spontaneous, free spirit going crazy. The violin playing's wonderful on his Vox recording, but it was from 1953. It's in mono, and the orchestra's terrible. And again, it's half a performance. But if you're a fan of like Gitlis or crazy violin playing, it's worth hearing for that, but not as an experience, a total experience of the Berg Violin Concerto. The other one that I always kind of liked was Gideon Kramer and Colin Davis with Bavarian Radio Forces. It was on Philips and it was reissued on Newton Classics. But listening to it again and again and again, it hasn't held up all that well as I had hoped it would. So I didn't include it in this pile either. But included now, we have Henrik Schering, yay, with Raphael Kubelik. This was a famous performance, and he's a wonderful violinist. And he has they're all with the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra and Kubelik. The Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra under Kubelik was also not the greatest orchestra in the world, but they do a good job, and it's wonderfully played by the violinist. And it's now coupled in this reissue with that classic Schoenberg coupling, the Schoenberg Violin Concerto and Piano Concerto with Alfred Brendel and Zvi Zeitlin playing the Schoenberg Violin Concerto. This is a great disc. It really is. And the Schoenberg Violin Concerto is much tougher to listen to than the Berg. But I don't know. It grows on you. Kind of like a fungus, but it grows on you. So that's me. Maybe it won't grow on you. You may be fungus repellent. I don't know. Anyway, the Berg here is really a fine performance, and it's nice to have. Also excellent, and sort of one that has its own cachet among Berg Violin Concerto fans, is this Joseph Suk and Karel Angerl with the Czech Philharmonic. I mean, Angerl is great. The Czech Philharmonic is great. Joseph Suk is a wonderful, wonderful violinist, a sensitive violinist. He's not the guy who's going to just erupt in like gouts of passionate extravagance. And some people may want it in this piece because it's a hothouse flower of a kind of piece. And we'll get to one of those performances next. But this is a classy, somewhat subdued, but beautifully pointed and elegant interpretation of the work. And it comes with the Mendelssohn and Bruch concertos. Perfect couplings, you would think, right? Well, it's a collection. It's a wonderful disc on Suprafund. Speaking of hothouse flowers, yeah, Isaac Stern and Leonard Bernstein. I like this performance. If you want the red-blooded, romantic, it sounds like Mahler school, it really sort of does. This is just a take no prisoners, fling yourself at the work and let it erupt, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. It's a brilliant performance full of emotion and heat. And heat is a good thing in the Berg Violin Concerto on Sony. Terrific. Also superb, but in a different way, in a more, say, contemporary-ish way, is this really wonderful recording with Thomas Zayetmeyer. I like the German violin school, I have to tell you. I know everyone goes for like the French or the whatever, but I like these players. You'll see a few more of them later. I like the way they play. They have a certain steeliness to the tone that I think is appropriate, a good intonation and rhythmic acuity, and I just think that they're very good, particularly in this music. And this is a wonderful coupling. You get the Berg Violin Concerto, you get the Janáček Violin Concerto, that one movement, what became the overture to From the House of the Dead, subtitled The Wandering of a Little Soul, whatever that means. It's only, it's like 11 minutes long. It's a short piece. And he didn't really finish it. It was completed later, but it's a cool single movement work. And you get the Hartmann Concerto Funèbre, which is a wonderful, wonderful piece, a dark, creepy piece that's the perfect coupling for the Berg. So this is with the Philharmonia under Heinz Holliger in the Berg, which is pretty good. There you get your 20th century avant-garde bona fides. And Zeytmeyer is the conductor with the Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie in the Hartmann on Teldec. If you can still find it, it's a classy disc. Really very, very good disc. Also superb, absolutely superb, was Anna Sophie Mutter with James Levine and the Chicago Symphony. This is a really, really good, passionate performance, played like gangbusters by everybody. The only issue is that the coupling, Wolfgang Riem, his Gesangene Zeit, time chant. Yes? Gesungene Zeit. There it is. Gesungene Zeit, sung time, chanted time, the time chant for violin and orchestra. Well, it's not as terrible as you might think it would be, but it's probably not a piece that you're going to return to all that often. Wolfgang Riem is one of those sort of, avant-garde leftovers. He's still out there, I think, writing stuff and nobody particularly likes or cares about. And this was written for Anna Sophie Mutter, who bravely plays it magnificently. Again, it's not a bad piece. It's kind of interesting. It's got some nice noises in it. Do you actually want to hear it? But the Berg, it's hot stuff. Very, very good. And I return to this performance often for the Berg. And I even listen to the Riem once in a while. It's kind of fun. If you're too lazy to turn the thing off when the Berg is over, you get to hear the Riem. And sometimes you don't regret it. So there you go. Now I'm into my top 3 of our dozen. First, this is just a terrific disc. This is part of a 2-volume or 2-album, it's 3 discs series from Gil Shaham on violin concertos of the 1930s. And this first one is quite a collection. You've got the Barber, the Hartmann Concerto Funèbre, the Berg, the Stravinsky, and the Britten. I mean, what a great selection of stuff. I mean, I just love the concept. This is on Shaham's own album, own label, Canary Classics. And, these are some live performances, which, they're all well recorded and decent. But the Berg, oh, wow, you've got David Robertson, who, as we know, is a contemporary music guy. He really directs a brilliant, clear, intelligent, and sympathetic account of the orchestral part with the Staatskapelle Dresden. I mean, I love the Staatskapelle Dresden, don't you? They're wonderful. They're wonderful in this music. They sound great because they have that kind of clarity of texture and sound that's perfect for this stuff. And I love this performance. It's live. It has spontaneity, as live performances so often do, but also tremendous discipline and artistic intelligence with real give and take between Shaham and Robertson and the orchestra. It's great. It's absolutely terrific. Also terrific and a classic, and some of you will poo-poo this, but I don't give a damn. Perlman and Ozawa with Boston. Again, these are great players. Perlman always gets poo-pooed, because it's Perlman. It's like he's supposed to be a sort of flash in the pan cello virtuoso. He's not. He's a great artist, a great, great violinist. So, and Ozawa is great in this music. He's a perfect exponent of Berg with the Boston Symphony playing gloriously. This comes with the Stravinsky and Ravel's Tzigana. Yuck, the worst piece of violin music ever written by anybody. Well, not entirely. There's always Wieniawski, but it's coupled. Let's just put it that way. But boy, for the Berg and the Stravinsky, this is a classic. It always has been. And, there's a tendency, especially among Bergians and classical music snobs, to downgrade anything that comes out on a major label, as if the biggest and best artists, were really not capable of anything, and their reputations are all based on hype. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. The key, as always in these cases, is to actually listen. Listen. A great, great performance of the Berg with stunning violin playing and orchestral accompaniment. A great performance of the Stravinsky with stunning violin playing and orchestral accompaniment. And a great performance of Ravel's Tzigana. Ugh. Who cares? However, we now come to the pièce de résistance, the Berg to end all Bergs, the ultimate performance of this absolute 20th century expressionist avant-garde masterpiece. It is Frank Peter Zimmermann. Now, Frank Peter Zimmermann is another one of those German school violinists. I just think he's a fabulous artist. My God, he's a great artist. Have you heard his Mozart violin concertos? When we do the talk on those, wait till you hear. Oh, they're wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Anyway, Frank Peter Zimmermann is great, and so is the conductor here, Gianluigi Gelmetti, with the Stuttgart Radio Symphony Orchestra. And you know what? It's exactly the same couplings as the Perlman. You get the Stravinsky Violin Concerto, fabulously done, and Ravel's Tzigana. Ugh. So there you go. I mean, you get the Perlman and you get this one, and you're like totally set for those works. It's fantastic. But this recording of the Berg, I think, in the combination of passion and accuracy and pacing, and wow, it just blew me away the minute I heard it some years ago. This is a Japanese Warner release, by the way, but it's still available. You can still find it, and you just have to, because Frank Peter Zimmermann is such a great violinist. Not the biggest name on the planet, but a violinist of just astonishing integrity, perfect technique, incredible intelligence, wonderful passion and intensity, and the conducting and playing on this is just great, and it's wonderfully recorded. I think this is just the most perfect performance of the Berg that I have ever heard. Now, there are other performances of the Berg, like I've mentioned. Sinopoli did one, and I think who was it? Watanabe, I think, was the violinist. There are lots of others, and you may have your favorite, but I think 12 is enough to give you a sense of what's out there. And on that basis, you can find your way to Bergian nirvana. So keep on listening, folks. Thanks for joining me in this survey of the Berg Violin Concerto in memory of an angel. Take care.